Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060 with Pioneer Field Agronomist Allie Wise and Josh Schaffner. Here's Josh and Allie.
Good morning, Southeast Minnesota. Today is May 19th, 2021. Josh, this is episode number 71. So we took a quick break last week. Things have been busy, really busy, as I'm sure everyone has been feeling. We've worked in another compressed planting window yet this year. But obviously some interesting things to look at as we moved into this week. A lot of corn has emerged last week into this week. So there are many, many assessments to make and just a lot of different factors that are contributing to differences in stand across the area, specifically in corn. Obviously, a lot of observations in beans too, and more information on those to come. But I think before we kind of jump too far into this, just a quick update on where we're sitting GDU wise and how some of these factors are definitely contributing to what we're seeing stand wise across the area.
Yeah, it's definitely been a slow GDU year. I don't think that probably is a surprise when you think about kind of the way the season has been. It's been unique, Allie. You think back, we started planting, some of the earliest corn we saw planted goes all the way back to April 5th, which not very much. Some people are just maybe practicing with some new planters and things like that. And then we kind of really fired off there around the, April, 15th, I guess would probably be when a lot of guys really got going. And in just doing that, Allie, we're kind of sitting. It ranges across Southeast Minnesota. I would say, since April 15th, 17th, we're ranging from, around 145 to 180, depending on where you're at there is going to cover a lot of it. And when you kind of look back, it's like, okay, how have we done per day? If we go back to April 18th or April 15th, we've only averaged about 5.8 GDUs per day, which if you really think about that, that's pretty putrid accumulation over time, especially when there's 18 days of May in that. And I think overall, Allie, the corn crop shows that it's taken a long time to get this crop emerged, and we've had some challenges along the way.
Yeah. So as you look at as we're out in these cornfields, obviously these plants, we're seeing a lot of healthy plants that had just been sitting right at the surface there. But because, like we're talking about, they've been in the ground so long, they were just starting to run out of steam, unfortunately, in some cases. We feel confident a lot of those will make it, but that's why so many assessments have been made. I know you're working with a few different issues to the east in contribution with some of the cold. To the west, I definitely look at, you mentioned just the dry 2020 spring. For me, that's relating back to the fact that we're not having microbe activity to break down or in the soil moisture to break down that residue. So, we talk about the largely fit conditions that we had early planting, really nice to see, but kind of that no such thing as a free lunch concept. That's where it comes back to. In the absence of moisture, we've just got a lot of lack of breakdown of residue. And so I'm definitely seeing variableness between corn on beans, and how much residue is coming into play. But as we move back east of 52, Josh, maybe just an explanation of the unique things that you've been working with over there.
Yeah, the rotary hoe hotline has been working overtime the last 10 days or so, that is for sure. And it is very different east-west. I think we all had equally great planting conditions. And I think we'll remember this planting season as, man, we planted in some of the best soil conditions we've ever had, but it was so unique. It's just so rare to be as dry and fit as we were, but to be as cold as we were. It's just something that a combination we don't normally see. A lot of times we're warm and with great conditions, or warm and wet, or cool and wet. It's very often to see a cold of a spring like this to be that dry. And I think it's a frustrating deal where you're talking about the residue challenges, which we're seeing to these two. We're talking about other things. And, you put all this together. So I think we're just going to be, there's some good stands out there, but I think for the conditions we planted in, a lot of us are going to be disappointed that it's not more perfect, just because of how great it was. But yeah, the rains we had there a few Sundays ago, ranged anywhere from probably an inch up to close to 4 inches across the southeast corner. And we talked about it all spring, Allie, for how mellow and great these soil conditions were. If we were to get a pounding rain, we knew we were going to have issues with crusting. And this has been a very unique crust. I've kind of coined it the cold weather crust, where, a lot of times when we get crust, we get a pounding rain, we get sunny, we get hot, and it kind of just turns to concrete. This was a little bit different where we got that pounding rain, but it stayed really cold. The crust took a little while to form. It's a very fragile crust. So the one thing that's nice is where we are rotary hoeing, we're really just exploding and shattering the crust where the rotary hoe is doing what it's designed to do. And we've saved a lot of plants. With that said, we had some people still out yesterday, and hopefully the moisture we're receiving here will alleviate a lot of this stress here. But yeah, just been a challenge. I had to take a lot of scouting, and And I think the rotary hoe is going to save a lot of stands. Not going to maybe make them perfect, but definitely, in some cases, we're probably going to see, an increase of 5,000 to 8,000 plants per acre, which is going to have a big difference when the combine rolls this fall.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with some of these variables, we've had a lot of discussions on, there's a lot of debate about the number of hours plants within a row should emerge. My take would be that dealing with the conditions we've had, being as it's a cooler spring, I would say there's more margin of error than versus a warmer spring. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I think, we read about that, can we get all the plants to emerge within a close time frame? It'd be great, but we're also Minnesota. That's always going to be a challenge to do where early planting tends to trump that method a little bit. But yeah, we're going to see some variability emergence. I think a lot of it's going to stay within a collar alley. We may see some stuff that gets close to collar, but if we can keep it all within one collar, not going to be a big deal, which I think a lot of it will be. So don't stress if you have some up, some not up. If we stay within 2 collars, it won't be a big thing. And Allie, when we come out of break, we'll talk a little bit more about conditions and the state of the soybean crop and a few other notes from the field. Welcome back, listeners. Allie, we kind of talked about a lot of the challenges that you and I have been buzzing around looking at fields here the last 2 weeks and talked about the crusting and some of the residue challenges, especially on the corn on corn acres. And in some case, even, where we did a little bit of no-till corn on beans, just to even fighting some of the 2-year-old residue out there, but just a lot of residue in general. We talked a little bit about the reduced stands from crusting. And one question that's came up a lot, Allie, at this stage of the game, it's not super late if we were to have to replant. We're sitting here, May 19th. However, when we do look at a replanting chart and what is an acceptable final stand in corn, why don't we walk through some of the, final stand counts and versus planting dates and kind of what that threshold should be if we should consider replant corn or not to consider a replant.
Yeah, so a few considerations here, but I think the number one thing we need to remember is that planting date is still working in our favor tremendously. So the bulk of our corn was planted before April 25th. So if we look at dates before April 25th, even if our stand would be down to say 25,000 in this case, we're still at about 90% potential of the yield in that field. So obviously you're starting to get down to some lower numbers. But so even if we're down to 25,000, let's say we felt we were at a point that we wanted to come back and replant. At this point, as soon as we'd get in the field would be probably after that May 20th planting date. Even if we were to come back now, replant, get a perfect stand of say 35,000, we would still only be capturing 88% of the yield potential. So we're at least 10% off with the yield potential we're working with this year. Like you and I had talked, that could correlate to at least 20 bushels. So theoretically, we could even be down in the range of 20 to 24,000 in the case of this year with planting dates working in our favor before we would be at a point to be considering replant. Any additional thoughts there?
Yeah. My take on that, especially as we were looking early this week and last week, is anything 24,000 above, we're not even going to talk about replant. When you get from 20 to 24, that's kind of you can maybe toss that one around, have a discussion. As we start falling below 20, that's where I'd be pretty concerned and say, we might be better off, maybe looking at a replant situation. In most cases, I really, I like to avoid that replant. Usually it just seems like that early planting date trumps, replanting if it gets good stands. But there are situations where, right or wrong, we just don't want to stare at a poor stand. We'd rather get it replanted and get it up there. And sometimes we just do it for the sake of not having to look at it. It's not the right thing to do usually when you look at the metrics. And, we look at a lot of early planting date, information every year, Allie. And we always see lower stands in those early planting dates. But if that's putting more bushels in the bin and returning more income per acre, that's what it's all about. Yeah.
So ultimately, like I said, I'm just looking at, we know timely planting is well correlated to some of the greatest yield potential for both corn and soybeans. So that's kind of, why we maybe have those talking points that we do at this state of time. A little bit of a shift here to beans. Beans can be a little bit more forgiving. There's not necessarily significant issues unless, we have a lot of cases where some of these beans are sitting in dry soil. Maybe they were planted a little too deep and the hypocotyl, can't get those cotyledons pushed through. Or in some cases with those shallower planting depth, or we were just riding across the surface really with the residue working against us, we have a lot of seeds that haven't germinated there. So as we shift focus to soybeans from a replant consideration standpoint, I always think in my head, 90,000 plants correlates to 90% of yield. Is that correct?
Yep. And that's always a number I like to look at. 90,000 above. I won't even consider replant. I usually don't consider even putting some supplemental population back out there. It's once we fall below 90, that can tail off really quick. The worst thing, Allie, is when you get like an 85. It's like, what do I do? Those are the ones where sometimes they're kind of coin flip situations, right? It's hard to predict what it'll be, but that 90 number is the cutoff, and then anything below that, Allie, that's where you have a discussion with someone like yourself or myself or your seed rep agronomist, and kind of go through the pros and cons of what we should do there, if we should take a look at it. In most cases, the beans don't want to tear them up. You should just go back out there and plant more in with the corn planter, or I prefer to use 30-inch rows even if they're drilled at this point, just because we can still save some of those early planted ones. But yeah, they've been fighting the crust too, Allie, and it's been, beans they're kind of friendly to the neighbors, but if you ever want to see how powerful they are, if you want to see some slabs of dirt getting pushed up, if you drove around this week, if you saw some funny things popping up in fields with the dirt, it's like, what's going on there? It's actually the beans trying to find their way to sunlight, but they've definitely been doing some work as well.
Yeah, I think that's been a commonality. If we look at our assessments so far between drilled beans and those planted in 30-inch rows with a corn planter, there certainly are a few differences there. For one, you look at residue management between a drill and a corn planter, obviously a lot more control with the planter, which can help tremendously, especially when we're talking about the differences in residue that we are this year. And then you also look at, like you said, the power of 30-inch rows with those, the plant-to-plant spacing, those plants being able to work together to push themselves through, versus in a drill, you get a little bit more sporadic. So they just don't work as a group as well to push themselves up and out of the ground. So certainly a lot of assessments to make yet in that arena, Josh. Another just quick thing, I've been seeing a few kind of weeds starting to pop through. A few folks are thinking, when should I start to consider maybe some of my post or earlier post applications?
Yeah, I think as soon as we get through this rain period here, weeds are starting to germ. We get the moisture here. Warmer temps are going to come quick, but as soon as we get right up here, I do some scouting. I think some of these corn acres will be ready to roll early post right away. With that, Allie, that's a wrap for this week, and we'll be back next week, and we'll probably talk a whole lot more things, and probably weed control will be front and center.
You've been listening to Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060. If you've missed part of the show or want to hear more, check out the show page at KFILradio.com or with the 103.1 KFIL app. Stay connected with Allie and Josh on Twitter. It's at AllieGWise, WISE, and at Josh Schaffner to submit your questions for the show. Tune in next Wednesday for the next Today in Agronomy on KFIL AM 1060.